She told me I was broken, that the doctors agreed, that the papers were signed, that it was already over. She said it the way you might tell someone the weather calm, almost bored, like my entire life had just become a minor inconvenience she was finally resolving. I believed her for exactly 4 days. Then I started paying attention. My name is Callie. I'm 29 years old, and for 11 weeks last spring, I was locked inside a private psychiatric facility in rural Virginia while my aunt and her husband dismantled everything my father had spent his life building with my signature on documents I never touched, my name on forms I never saw, and my silence bought by a diagnosis I never had. This is what happened, all of it. My father passed away on a Tuesday in February, pancreatic cancer. He was 58 and he fought it for 14 months, and he never once complained, not even at the end. He was the kind of man who apologized to the nurses when his IV beeped too loudly at night. He worried about bothering people. He worried about me. What he did not worry about, because he trusted the wrong person entirely, was his estate. My father built a small logistics company from nothing. He started it in a rented garage in Roanoke when I was 3 years old. By the time I was in college, it had 12 employees. By the time he got sick, it had 44 in a contract with 2 regional hospital networks. It wasn't a Fortune 500 company, but it was real. It was his. And in his will, drafted when I was 26, he left 70% of it to me and 30% to his younger sister, my Aunt Diane. Diane had worked in the company for years. She knew the clients, the vendors, the lease agreements. She was smart and organized, and she smiled at me every Christmas and called me sweetheart and brought me lavender lotion in the hospital when my father was dying. I thought I knew her. I did not know her at all. 3 weeks after the funeral, I started getting phone calls from the company's accountant. Small things at first, a missing authorization here, a vendor payment she couldn't trace. I asked Diane about it. She brushed it off. Family stress, she said, grieving. Everything would settle. I let it go because I was grieving too, and I didn't have the strength to push. Then the accountant called again. This time her voice was different. Quieter. She said Diane's husband, a man named Gordon, had been coming into the office. She said he had been asking for access to the operating accounts. She said she wasn't comfortable with it but didn't know what to do. I told her I would handle it. That was the last conversation we had before everything fell apart. I drove to the company office on a Thursday morning. I had a copy of my father's will in my bag. I had questions prepared. I was calm. I was not prepared for what I found, which was Gordon sitting at my father's desk, in my father's chair, with a stack of documents in front of him and a look on his face like he had been expecting me. He was not surprised. He was waiting. He told me to sit down. I didn't. He told me there had been concerns, serious concerns about my mental state since my father's passing. He said people were worried. He said I had made erratic calls, sent strange messages, shown up at places at odd hours. He said a doctor had been consulted. He said it was for my own good. I told him I didn't know what he was talking about. He slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was a petition for emergency and voluntary psychiatric evaluation, signed by Diane, countersigned by a physician I had never met, and notarized 3 days earlier. It cited grief-induced psychosis. It cited a risk of harm. It cited behaviors I had never engaged in, documented by people I had never spoken to. Before I could finish reading it, 2 men I did not recognize came through the door. They were not police. They were from a private transport company contracted by the facility. I learned that later. In the moment, all I knew was that they were large and professional, and they had paperwork, and they told me very politely that I was going to come with them. I said no. One of them said that resisting would be noted in my file as confirmation of the evaluation need. I want you to understand something. I am not a person who falls apart easily. I worked 2 jobs through college. I sat with my father through 7 rounds of chemotherapy. I am not fragile. But in that moment, standing in my dead father's office with 2 strangers holding a legal document with my name on it, I felt something give way inside me. Not my mind, my certainty, my sense that the ground was solid. I went with them because I did not yet understand what I was dealing with. I thought it would be resolved in hours. I thought a doctor would speak to me, realize there was nothing wrong, and send me home. The facility was called Meadow Ridge. It was clean and quiet, and the staff were professional, and it was absolutely a place Diane had chosen because its owner owed Gordon a favor, though I did not know that for several weeks. I was placed in a voluntary hold that was not voluntary. I was told I could request a hearing. I requested one. It was scheduled for 6 weeks out. 6 weeks. Diane visited me on the third day. She sat across from me in the family room and she held my hands and she told me how worried she had been. She said my father's death had clearly affected me more than anyone realized. She said she was handling the company in the meantime. She said I needed to focus on getting well. I looked at her face. She was not grieving. She was not worried. She was neat and composed, and there was something behind her eyes that I can only describe as relief. The kind of relief you feel when a complicated problem has finally been managed. I pulled my hands back. I said, "What did Gordon take from the accounts?" She stood up. She told the staff she thought I needed more rest. She didn't come back for 17 days. Here is what they did not count on. They gave me a notebook. Journals are encouraged in facilities like that. Therapeutic expression. I wrote down everything. Every date, every name, everything I could remember. Every document I had glimpsed before being removed from the office. The accountant's name, the vendor discrepancies she had mentioned, Gordon's exact words. They also did not count on my roommate. Her name was Priya. She was 34, a former paralegal who had been committed by her ex-husband during a custody dispute, a tactic, her attorney later confirmed, her ex had researched specifically. She had been at Meadow Ridge for 3 weeks when I arrived. She was the clearest thinking person I had ever met. On my 6th night there, when the hallway was quiet, she told me exactly what was happening to me, not with emotion, with precision. She said the process Diane had used was a legitimate legal pathway being used for an illegitimate purpose. She said the 6-week hearing delay was standard but not mandatory. A good attorney could accelerate it. She said the critical thing was getting word out before the hearing, not at it. I asked her how. We had supervised phone time, 30 minutes per day, monitored. She thought about it for a moment. Then she said, "Who is the one person outside this building that Diane would never think to worry about?" I thought about it for a long time. And then I thought of my college roommate, Bex. Bex was not someone Diane knew existed. She was not family. She was not connected to the company. She lived in Philadelphia and worked in graphic design, and the last time Diane had ever heard me mention her was probably never. She was also the most aggressively competent person I knew, and she answered on the second ring. I had 90 seconds of unmonitored time while a staff member dealt with a situation down the hall. I used all of it. I said, "Diane had me committed. Gordon is looting the company. I need an attorney who handles guardianship fraud, and I need you to find one before my hearing in 6 weeks. Don't call Diane. Don't call anyone in my family. Call the company accountant, her name is Ruth, and tell her what's happening. Tell her to preserve everything." Beck said, "Okay." That was it. Just okay. Like I had asked her to pick up coffee. I hung up before anyone noticed. The next 4 weeks were the longest of my life. I attended every group session. I was cooperative. I was calm. I wrote in my notebook every day. I noticed things. Which staff members worked, which shifts, which visiting hours were less supervised, which administrator seemed uncomfortable. Whenever Gordon's name came up in intake paperwork, she was processing near the nurses' station. That administrator's name was Carol. She had worked at Meadow Ridge for 11 years. She was not part of whatever arrangement Diane had made. And on a Wednesday afternoon in week 4, when she was passing my room and I said her name quietly through the door, she stopped. I told her I wasn't a danger. I told her I had been placed here under false pretenses while a financial fraud was being committed against my late father's estate. I told her I had an attorney now, which Bex had confirmed by smuggling a note through a visiting friend, and that the hearing was in 2 weeks. I told her I wasn't asking her to break any rules. I was asking her to make sure my file was accurate and complete, and that no one had added anything to it that shouldn't be there. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said she took the accuracy of patient records very seriously. 3 days later, 2 entries that had been added to my file, both describing episodes I had not had, both dated to nights when I had been observed on camera in the common room, were flagged as potentially erroneous by an internal records review. I don't know exactly what Carol did. I know what didn't happen. Those entries were not in my file at the hearing. My attorney's name was Marcus Webb. Bex had found him in 4 days. He specialized in wrongful institutionalization and elder financial abuse, and he was 61 years old, and he had the energy of someone who had been waiting for exactly this kind of case. He had filed an emergency motion to accelerate my hearing before I even met him in person. The hearing happened 5 weeks after I arrived, not 6, 1 week early. A small thing, an important thing. Marcus had Ruth's documentation. He had bank transfer records showing 3 wire transfers from the company's operating account to a personal account in Gordon's name, totaling just over $340,000 in the 6 weeks since my father's death. He had the original petition for my commitment and the name of the physician who had signed it, a man who, Marcus discovered, had lost his license to practice in Maryland 2 years earlier for insurance fraud and was operating under a different credential structure in Virginia. He had a declaration from Priya, who had reached her own attorney by then, about the conditions of our admission and the irregularities she had personally witnessed. He had my notebook. Diane did not have a lawyer at the hearing who was prepared for any of this. She had an attorney who had been told this was a straightforward family welfare matter involving a grieving young woman and a concerned aunt. That attorney figured out very quickly that it was not that. The judge asked Diane directly whether she had any financial interest in my father's estate. She said she had a 30% stake as outlined in the will. The judge asked whether any actions had been taken regarding the estate's operating accounts since my admission to Meadow Ridge. Diane's attorney asked for a recess. The judge said no. I was released that afternoon. My commitment was vacated. The physician who had signed the petition was referred to the Virginia Board of Medicine. The judge ordered an immediate freeze on all company accounts pending a full forensic audit. I walked out of Meadow Ridge at 4:47 inches the afternoon on a Thursday. Bex was waiting in the parking lot. She handed me a coffee and didn't say anything for a while, which was exactly right. Then she said, "Ruth saved everything, every transfer, every email, every access log." I said, "I know." She said, "Gordon apparently tried to delete the server backup the week you went in." I said, "Did it work?" She smiled. Ruth had already sent a copy to her personal email. She said she had a bad feeling the day he first showed up at the office. I thought about that for a moment, about Ruth, who I had met 4 times, who had called me about a vendor discrepancy she could have easily ignored, who had preserved everything because she'd had a bad feeling. People like that are rare. I want her to know, if she ever hears this, that she changed everything. The forensic audit took 11 weeks. In that time, the full picture came into focus. Gordon had not acted impulsively. This had been planned before my father died, possibly before my father's diagnosis was publicly known within the family. The transfers were the visible piece. Underneath them were 3 contracts he had renegotiated with vendors at terms that routed kickbacks to a shell company he controlled. There was also a life insurance policy my father had taken out, naming me as sole beneficiary. Gordon had obtained a change of beneficiary form, forged my signature, and redirected it to Diane. The total value of what they had attempted to take, including the redirected policy and the company accounts, was just over $1.2 million. Diane was charged with financial elder abuse, fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. Gordon was charged with wire fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. The physician lost his remaining credentials in Virginia and faced separate charges for filing a fraudulent medical petition. They did not go to trial. Both pleaded guilty. Diane received 4 years. Gordon received 6. Their attorney argued for leniency given Diane's age and her genuine grief over my father's death. The judge acknowledged the grief. She gave the sentence anyway. I stood in that courtroom and I watched Diane look at me for the first time since the hearing. She looked tired. She looked like she wanted me to say something, to give her something. An acknowledgement, maybe. Or forgiveness. Or just the recognition that it had been complicated, that she had loved my father too, that grief does strange things to people. I didn't give her any of it. Not because I'm hard. Not because I haven't spent hours trying to understand how someone who brought me lavender lotion in a hospital waiting room became someone who signed papers to have me locked away. I have thought about it more than I want to admit. I don't have a clean answer. What I have is this. My father worked for 26 years. He built something real. He left it to me because he trusted me with it, and because he loved me, and because he believed I would do right by the people who worked there. 44 people still have jobs because Ruth sent an email to her personal account, because Priya walked me through what was happening with the clarity of someone who had been through it herself, because Bex answered her phone on the second ring and just said, okay. I think about those 3 women a lot. The company is still mine. I bought out Diane's 30% stake through the court settlement. The remaining value after the funds were recovered was used partly for that, partly for legal fees, and the rest went back into operations. Ruth is now the CFO. She told me she didn't want the title, just the salary adjustment and a better chair. I got her both. Priya's case resolved 4 months after mine. Her ex-husband's attempt to use a psychiatric hold as a custody weapon backfired spectacularly when Marcus, who she had retained, presented a pattern of similar tactics he had used against her during the marriage. She has full custody now. She sends me a text on the 1st of every month. It says the same thing every time, still standing. I still have the notebook. 43 pages of dates and names and details written in the careful handwriting of someone who understood that the only way out was to pay attention. I don't keep it somewhere sentimental. It's in the filing cabinet in my office, in a folder behind the vendor contracts. Some nights I drive past Meadow Ridge. Not often, not on purpose. The road between my apartment and the company runs near it, and sometimes I catch the lights through the tree line. I don't feel what you might expect. I don't feel rage or grief or the particular cold horror of that first night. Mostly I feel grateful that I did not stop writing, that I did not decide the notebook was pointless. That, in the worst of it, when the days were slow and the outcome was genuinely uncertain, I kept putting down one word after another. My father used to say that the most dangerous thing you can do in a bad situation is decide it's already over. He said it about business. He said it about his diagnosis. He said it in the way that people say things when they know, somewhere underneath the words, that they are also saying it to themselves. He was right. He was almost always right. I didn't get to tell him what Diane did. I've made my peace with that. He trusted her. That wasn't a failure of judgment, it was a reflection of who he was. He believed people were mostly trying. He built a company by treating everyone around him like they were mostly trying. I'm not going to let what Diane did rewrite him into someone who was naive or foolish. He was generous. There's a difference. What I will say is this. If you are reading this or listening to this, and there is something that feels wrong, a signature you don't recognize, a document someone is asking you to rush through, a person being just a little too smooth about the details of something that matters to you, pay attention to that feeling. Write it down. Call the person who would never occur to anyone else to worry about. Don't decide it's already over. The ground can feel very solid right up until the moment it isn't, but it can also come back. I promise you that. It can come back.